Baen Free Radio Hour is brought to you by Baen Books Audio Drama, presenting dramatized audio plays of the best science fiction and fantasy with a professional cast and cinema quality soundtracks. Now available, Eric Flint's Islands, based on the novella by Eric Flint. Also available, Larry Correia's Detroit Christmas, based on the novella by Larry Correia, set in the world of the Grim Noir Chronicles at BaenEbooks.com. Just put Islands and Detroit Christmas in the search bar and enter a world of listening pleasure. Baen Books Audio Drama.
The Baen Free Radio Hour.
On the podcast, the Jim Baen Memorial Award is in the house. Saviors, scapegoats, and pointy trophies, plus the latest entry in our complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic. All right now. Welcome to the Baen Free Radio Hour podcast. It's an honor to have you along. I'm Baen editor Tony Daniel. We have a discussion with the winner and the runners-up of the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award for 2015 this time. Also in on the conversation is Bill Ledbetter, the contest administrator. We recorded this up in Toronto at the International Space Development Conference, where the award is presented. This is an annual get-together of the space development community, and it is sponsored by the National Space Society, which also jointly sponsors the Jim Baen Memorial Award, along with Baen Books. The winner this year is K.B. Rylander for her short story, We Fly. It is featured on the Baen.com front page and is part of our free short story ebook collection for 2015, available at BaenEbooks.com. Our runners-up are Jamie Lackey and Robert Dawson, and they were at the conference as well. You can find out lots more about the contest and about how to enter by going to Baen.com/Baen Memorial Award.asp. That's www.baen.com/Baen Memorial Award.asp. And after that, we continue with our complete audiobook serialization of Larry Correia's Hard Magic. It's read by Bronson Pinchot. Here's the news. The mass market paperbacks for June are here. These include 1636 Commander Cantrell in the West Indies by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon. This is, of course, another entry in the Ring of Fire alternate history series. We talked to Eric and Chuck about this book on a previous podcast, by the way. Also out is Spellblind by David B. Coe. This is the first entry in a contemporary fantasy mystery series featuring a were-mist detective, Justice Fearson. And if that sounds intriguing to you, you can read Spellblind and then check out His Father's Eyes, which will be out in August, its sequel. We also have a podcast interview with David B. Coe, which Gray Reinhardt conducted in January of this year. Finally, now out in mass market is the 10th entry in the popular and long-running General, or Raj Whitehall series. This is called The Savior, and it's by David Drake, who is the mastermind plotting all of these General books, and it's co-authored by me, Tony Daniel. The Savior is the sequel to The Heretic, which is Dave and I's first book together. Although you can read it as a standalone, it completes the story we began in The Heretic, and provides, I think, a pretty cool finale. The idea is that humans have settled the galaxy, but then there's a big high-tech meltdown, and now it's hundreds of years later, and some planets humans have settled don't even have a memory of the old days, and they've fallen into technological ruin. And on our planet, and the savior and evil AI is doing everything in its power to keep humanity in a kind of ancient Egyptian technological stasis by slaughters and pogroms if necessary. But our hero is not going to put up with that, and he has the means to change things, or at least shake them up, and thereby hangs our tale. 1636, Commander Cantrell in the West Indies by Eric Flint and Charles E. Gannon, Spellblind by David B. Coe, and The Savior by yours truly, Tony Daniel and David Drake, are now available in paperback at booksellers everywhere. This time on the podcast, we have the winner, the first runner-up and the second runner-up of the Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award. Is that what we call it?
Yes.
Bill? And we also have William Ledbetter, who is the administrator. Hi, guys. Welcome.
Hi.
And we're all sitting in a hotel room in Toronto. This is the International Space Development Conference, and this is where we give the award out every year to our lucky winner. Bill, can you tell us exactly what the criteria of this thing is?
Yeah, we started this in 2007, was the first year, and the idea behind it, the reason we have Baen and the National Space Society as co-sponsors is because, one, it's science fiction, but NSS wanted some science fiction that was near-term and rather realistic, and it's showing the heroic and inspiring story of man in space, to inspire and encourage people to
These are
go there.
generally, they're not stories about how horrible everything turns out to be.
Right, yeah, NSS naturally wants to show things in a positive light because we're very supportive of humanity expanding out through the solar system and the galaxy. So yes, we if you send us a story where everybody dies horribly because we shouldn't be in space to begin with, it probably isn't going to get very far.
Which is not to say we want happy.
No.
There could certainly be. There must be conflict.
Oh yeah. Yes. There would be no stories.
And danger and jeopardy and all that sort of things. And not all these stories perfectly exemplify, I think, those criteria. How did it get connected to the National Space Society?
Well,
This is the American National Space.
Right. My local chapter of NSS was hosting the International Space Development Conference in Dallas in 2007. And we were trying to come up with novel, interesting things to do to generate interest. And of course, being a writer, even then, I said, well, I'd like to have a short story contest, and basically with the same parameters, near future, man in space type thing. And they said, yeah, that's a great idea, let's do it. And I had just recently published a story with Jim Baen's Universe, the online magazine that was going at the time, and so I knew a few people at Baen, and I thought, well, maybe they would be interested in publishing the winner of the contest, and so I contacted some people, and it actually went on up to Jim Baen. This was shortly before he died, and he really liked the idea, so it took off. It was only supposed to be a one-off, but after Jim died, Tony says, it worked really well, and it would be a good memorial for him because he was very supportive of this kind of fiction. So we made it an annual thing after that. So
the winner this year is KB Rylander. Is it Rylander? Rylander, we better know. Whose name is Karen, allegedly. That's what the K is for. KB Rylander's story "We Fly" was our pick for the best story, and we are going to publish that on the Baen.com webpage, for which we pay professional rates, and that will be really cool. But the trophy will be even cooler because it's pointy. It doesn't look like a rocket. It looks like
pointy.
But it's pointy. It doesn't look like a rocket. It looks a lot better. It looks like the crystal that the aliens sent back with technology for us to teach us how to be better.
Yeah.
And make and solve all our problems.
And it does point up, which is kind of
points up. Yes. Excellent point. And we also have Jamie Lackey. Is that your entire writing name?
Yes,
Okay.
I write under Jamie Lackey.
Jamie Lackey, whose story is A Metal Box Floating Between the Stars, which is a very cool story as well. And we have Robert Dawson, whose story is called
Boomerang Zone.
Boomerang Zone, yes, Boomerang Zone. The way that the criterion for, how we judge the stories is that Bill picks out his Bill Ledbetter here picks out his favorites of the 100 or dozens and dozens that we have submitted, and then the Baen editors and David Drake, who has been our celebrity judge and will probably be our ongoing celebrity judge, as Tony likes to call him. We all get together and pick out what we like the best, and we rate them in a sort of straw ballot sort of way. And after some back and forth discussion in the office and via email with David, etc., we arrive at a slate. And this year, there was not any question. Everybody put number one, Karen Rylander's story, We Fly. There was no horse trading. We didn't have to do anything about it except say that's the one. So we were very happy about that. It's a great story, and we're really happy to be publishing it, Karen.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, but you judges,
Thank you.
you judges are judging blind. You just get the story. You don't.
That's right. We have no idea.
And this is actually my first sale.
Wow.
First story sale.
So tell us about where this story came from, Karen. What's the genesis story of it?
Well, I think like a lot of writers, I have kind of a list of story ideas that I keep, just a Word document. And one of those ideas was a probe searching for life forms or a habitable planet. And that the story would be from the point of view of the probe. And so it was kind of sitting on my hard drive for a while. And when I sat down to see if I could make anything out of the story, started brainstorming a little bit and tried to think about what that experience might be like. And I had actually just written a robot story from the point of view of a robot, so I didn't actually want to do that. And so I started thinking about, the concept of a human mind being scanned and put into a probe. And also, so if you have a probe going any great distance, it's going to need to be pretty darn intelligent by itself. Just because of the problems of communication back with Earth, the delay is just going to make it impossible for it to not be able to be pretty self-sufficient. So if you could get to the point where you could put a human mind into a machine, it might make a lot of sense to do that. So I started playing with that idea and started looking at different places I might want them to go. I settled on Alpha Centauri, and so the basic premise of the story is the probe is a woman's mind. She wakes up at Alpha Centauri after 50 years of travel, and something is completely wrong with her. She doesn't have any damage to her, but she's malfunctioning, she's panicked, and she doesn't have any reason why that might be. So that's kind of the problem that she needs to solve. But at the same time, she has to try and find a habitable planet while she's there, which kind of started out as an exploration mission, but now that she's woken up, she's kind of got information sent from Earth while she was sleeping that there's a generation ship on the way, because some problems have been happening on Earth.
And she's a mind in the ship.
Yes.
So that she's unable to figure out. She knows something's missing, but she's unable to figure out what it is that's missing. Because if she knew what it was, then she would know what it was. I guess.
Right.
So,
yes.
So it's a kind of cool philosophical paradox as well as a survival story of we got to figure out what's going on here.
Yes.
And I think it's a very lyrical story as well. It's very emotionally told, and it's really good in that sense. Good character stuff as well that drives also a pretty riveting tale. So it is your first sale, but it's certainly not the first thing you've written, right?
Right. Yes.
You've been working at this for a while. Or?
Yeah, I think I kind of was always going to be a writer. I just didn't know it, and so I'd write as a kid and kind of off and on just for fun for years. And I didn't get serious about it until pretty recently. Decided to write a novel. I've have a couple of them kind of in the works, and then just pretty recently I started working on short fiction.
Have you submitted to any other contests?
I've got a couple of honorable mentions from Writers of the Future, so I've submitted there a couple times.
All right, well now you're in the big leagues.
Yes.
We also have with us here Jamie Lackey. Tell us a little bit about a metal box floating between the stories. There's a similarity between these two stories.
It's true. In mine, they're also going to Alpha Centauri, but instead of just one probe, it's essentially a space station just en route. They just send the whole station. And they're going to Alpha Centauri as well. But since it takes a long time to get there, the crew cycles through cold sleep. And the inspiration for the story is essentially it's a love story between pen pals, but they're writing notes to each other across time instead of space because they're in the same place, but only one of them is ever awake at the same time. The main character is one of the two engineers on the crew. It's about a 20-person crew, but each one's only awake one at a time. They have
a staggered wake
yeah,
up.
They wake up their replacement, make sure the replacement's okay, and then they go to sleep. And the two engineers are at opposite ends of the cycle because, if anything goes wrong, they don't want it to be a whole cycle before they get to their engineer. And each of them has a doctor after them. So that's, you go through the geologists and the biologists and everybody, and then you get to your engineer, and then your doctor, and then you repeat. And so she and the other engineer start writing back and forth, mostly about the robots, because she is the hardware person, so she builds the robot bodies, but he's the software guy, so he's running a test on artificial intelligence, and one of the robots responds very quickly and essentially becomes the ship's pet. And most of the tension in my story is more like interpersonal kind of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of dealing with the loneliness of being the only person awake on, once they get there, is supposed to be a habitat for 20 people. So it's, it's echoey and it's empty, and they've left everybody that they know behind. So there's a lot of emotional stuff going on for each of them.
Yeah, it's epistolatory. It's got very cool back and forth between them as their story develops, and it's a very touching tale as well. So, Robert Dawson, your Boomerang Zone is pretty hard SF. It's about a accident in space. It's the anti-gravity.
Well, it did start off, I suppose, when I was watching Gravity, and the scene where the astronaut falls away, gets tangled in the cables, then falls loose and is gone. And I was thinking, it just doesn't happen like that. And
how would you know that? Do you have any background in science?
Yes, I got a physics degree, but I first found out about this behavior of things in nearby orbits back when I was a kid and was reading Delaney's Babel 17, and there's a very neat scene in there. Now, Delaney is not normally thought of as hard science fiction, but there's this one scene where the heroine has to determine the orbit of a spaceship from inside a closed room. And she does this by putting things around the side of the room and watching them as the orbit goes on, to see how they drift into the middle of the room. And because of this strange language, Babel 17, that she's been learning, which has all sorts of strange stuff built into its structure, she knows from its word for great circle that these orbits are going to have to coincide after a quarter orbit. Anyhow, so that kind of stuck with me. And so when I saw it in the movie, I was tearing my hair out. And I thought, that would be an interesting idea for a story. Because, on the one hand, if things aren't just so, it's not going to be sort of a quarter orbit later. In general, it's a whole orbit before something comes back. On the far side, it usually misses. And now, two elliptical orbits that start from the same point are each one going to come back to the same point. The bad news is, usually, one of them is going to take longer to do it than the other. And that means that when the astronaut comes back to where he got blasted off the space station by the malfunctioning thruster, and why didn't he have a safety cord attached? Well, that's just the kind of guy he is. When he gets back there, he'll be back at that point, but the chances are the space station won't. Well, in this particular case, he thinks quickly enough to use up the last of his propellant to get himself into one of the set of orbits, at least approximately, where the orbital time is the same as it was for the space station. That's referred to in the story as the boomerang zone, because anything that goes off there comes back again. But, he's just doing this by the seat of his pants, and he's not going to come back exactly to the same point, grab onto a stanchion and say, "Ha!" Someone's going to have to go rescue him.
Yeah.
And that's what a shipmate has to do.
And they have to figure out what he has done, because he's
Exactly.
not able to tell them exactly.
And unfortunately, what they were outside the ship for right at the beginning was fixing the EVA vehicle they should have been using to go and collect him with. And they don't have all the parts yet, so she has to do it using suit thrusters. And 25 kilometers is a long distance to go using something that isn't really intended for that. So...
Well, that's all. It's also cool. And this is the kind... We get a lot of... or Bill picks out a lot of problem-solving stories, because that's the kind of thing that you often get with and this was just a perfect example of a problem-solving story. And that's one of the reasons we liked it so much, is because we see a bunch of those. There was about 3 or 4 of them in this batch, and they're good, but often they don't have that depth of character that also goes along with them, and we felt that here as well. So, tell us about it's been a while since I was a beginning writer trying to break in back in the 90s. After, you guys are all pushing, trying to get going with selling stories and such, right? Karen, are you planning on making a career here if you can do it?
Yeah, I would like to.
Well, your superhero YA sounds interesting.
Yeah, I guess I need to keep writing them and write more novels and more short stories and get them out there.
We were talking about writing groups that some of us have at home, and what and Bill, please join in here with it. What are the good characteristics and bad characteristics of somebody that wants to, say, enter this contest next year and get a story and needs some critiquing done? How would y'all suggest that they go about getting their story in top form? What do you do?
You can't just ask anybody. I mean, you need to ask somebody who you trust, and somebody who's going to understand the story and is going to be able to see the weaknesses that you might be blind to. It's like, for example, in our writers group, we have a wide variety of writers, and we have some who just aren't not technically inclined, and they tend to skip the technical parts. And in a story like Robert's, it's like, yeah, you'd miss the whole story if you did that. So you need to make sure to give it to the right person, and it has to be somebody you trust, somebody that whose abilities to read and dissect a story are good. So.
How do you find those people, though? I mean, there's so many writing groups out there that are just like mutual, like support groups for not writing. It would seem sometimes even.
My writers group is really kind of brutal. We interview people. We get samples of their writing, and we don't just. It's not an open group. We don't let anybody join. It's like all the existing members have to vote on any new members. So if we don't think they're up to snuff, or even if they're a beginning writer, if we see a lot of promise and think that they're willing to ramp up a little bit, and about half of our writers have all hit professional status as far as like SIFWA qualifications go and things like that. So
Or actually publishing somewhere.
yeah, and actually making money, pro rates on a lot of their stories. So yeah.
What about you guys?
Well, the one thing to keep in mind if you don't have a writers group like that available where you live, and in some places they're pretty scarce, is that almost anybody can give you good advice about what's wrong with your story, but whether they can tell you how to fix it is another question. But I mean, advice as to what's wrong is the most important thing. Fixing it is kind of your job, no matter how good the person who's advising you is. But if something doesn't work for a reader who has never written a thing in their life, that is, after all, what most of the people who read stories are like. That is who you're writing for. You're not primarily writing for other writers.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, if you have somebody like that reading your story, it's good to try and encourage them to identify the problem and say which part did not work, instead of skipping straight to how to fix it. Because a lot of times the how to fix it part is not what needs to be done. But if you can identify what the problem is, then you can usually figure it out on your own.
And you also have to be willing to listen. And you also have to learn when not to listen. Because other writers, readers, they miss things. Like there could be something in your story that they just missed, and so they think there's a problem that isn't there. But a lot of the time, if somebody finds a problem, even if you don't think it's there, you should at least check.
And especially if you have more than one person.
Yes, if you have 6 people say that they don't know what the heck you're talking about, the problem is probably not with them. If 6 people didn't get your point.
Yes. And one thing, go ahead.
Even if someone tells you that there's something wrong, maybe they just think there's a factual error or something in the story, you know perfectly well there isn't a factual error, then, that's just what Joe Walton calls the Tiffany Problem. You know this one. Back in the Middle Ages, early Middle Ages, Tiffany was actually a genuine Anglo-Norman name. There are records of noblewomen in Norman England called Tiffany. It's actually short for, it's a braided version of Theophania. But you try putting that into a historical novel, and the reader's going to throw the book across the room. And basically, if it doesn't work for the reader, it's your job to make it work for the reader, even if it's factually correct, as you wrote it.
Heck yeah. What are we doing here? Are we writing for ourselves? Are we writing for who we want to read it? Or we're trying to communicate something to people? And if you don't communicate to them, you are not communicating. It's not their fault. A lot of times, readers identify things. They're good readers, and they might not be analytic enough to figure out what it is that's bothering them. They might say the wrong thing. But if something's bothering somebody, there's probably something damn well that needs working on in a story. Unless they're an idiot. Just don't get those people here for stuff.
And actually, if I could jump in and say what's really helped for me is a couple of online writing critique resources is Critters and Science Fiction Writers Workshop. Which I've never used Critters, but I've heard a lot of good things about it. But I've used I think it's called Online Writers Workshop, and it's very good.
I use Critters, it's good.
I used to use Critters before I got my local face-to-face group. So if you don't have any other options,
like a kind of Match.com for writers.
People just trade critiques. But the thing is, if you're very active in it, you can get up to 20 or 30 critiques, and it's like 20, if you get 30 of them, like 25 of them might not be very useful, but if you have 5 good critiques that are all, help you polish your story, then it's worth the effort.
Another
25
really
are
good,
telling you what a random reader is going to react like.
Right.
And that is really valuable. I mean, if you're only getting your critique from writers, there are going to be things that a room full of writers will miss that one person who is basically more of a reader than a writer will nail for you.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of the reasons Critters is useful. The other reason Critters is useful is because it makes you keep up your total of critiquing other people's work, and you can learn a lot from that too.
Yeah.
Another great resource, and I think Bill has taken advantage, is the Baen's Bar critique. I mean, you can submit your stuff there, and people will read it and give you their thoughts on it. A lot of writers have, some Baen writers have started that, like Ringo, for instance. John Ringo came out of that critique.
Yeah, my first pro sale came through that critique group, that online group. So yeah.
And there's other. There's all kind of the lesson is that even though you're incredibly shy and socially inept, perhaps or not, but a lot of writers are introverts. You gotta figure out how to get out enough so that at least you actually have to show your stuff to somebody, and actually have to not cringe into a corner when somebody says they don't get something. I would say, right? So,
Yeah, you have to have a little bit of a thick skin. You can't take offense when people are trying to help you.
and you can develop it by just if something happens enough in a writing group, then you become inured to the pain it causes your soul, and
Yeah.
and you can start thinking about whether or not what they say makes sense or not.
And getting used to critiques is a good first step for getting used to negative reviews when you're ridiculously famous.
Yeah,
So
be ready for that.
yeah, exactly.
If you've got anyone in your writing group who actually critiques you by saying you're an idiot, then you're in the wrong group. If they say you haven't written this story as well as you should have, then that's not attacking you.
I mean, there's a lot of writers that came up without being in writers' group, but I don't think anybody has not had a group of readers that read their stuff and give them some feedback of first readers.
I say there's 2 main things you have to be willing to do. One is you have to be able to discount and not use feedback that you get, because I've seen people who try to incorporate every bit of criticism they get, and it's impossible, because a lot of times you have critiquers giving you contradictory advice, and on the other end you have to be willing to totally gut a story in order to save the good kernel of the good part of the story.
You got to figure out what it is you were trying to do and do it better. You don't want to change it to what they want you to do. But if you didn't know what you were trying to do going in, if your subconscious was not entirely, if your conscious is not clear on what your subconscious was telling you, a lot of times things are quite muddled. And rewriting and revision is essential, as well as finishing something. Not showing people your first 4 paragraphs and seeing what they think, especially your mom. So where are you guys from? Why do you want to write science fiction of all things?
I have never wanted to do anything else. Science fiction and fantasy. It's always what I wanted to do, much to my parents' joy when it was time for me to pick a college major. But they've always been very supportive, just a little more practical than me. But I don't know why I started, but I really like just genre fiction in general, because it's about being able to entertain people. Like, I write to entertain. I don't, like, if one of my stories gives someone some sort of miraculous life growth, that's great. But I write so that people can be entertained, because life can be hard, and I want my fiction to be fun.
Hallelujah.
That sounds like a pretty good Baen philosophy.
Yeah, I've heard that before. Yeah.
And I'm from Pittsburgh,
And you're from Pittsburgh.
which is awesome. Everyone should come to Pittsburgh. It's amazing.
And read Win Spencer's Tinker books, which are set in Pittsburgh. It's Pittsburgh of the magical realms. And Robert, you're a scientist. You're a teacher. You're a mathematician, right?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, but you're not satisfied with that. You want to conquer English as the English short story as well. Is that?
Well, I mean, it's for me, writing's a spare time activity. I'm certainly not planning to give up my day job, and I get a great deal out of that as well. But writing is certainly just that extra something in my life, and I love it.
Cool. And Karen,
How did I get into writing?
what do you want to? I mean, why are you not a chess champion as you started out to be?
Oh, yes. Yeah, I did compete in chess tournaments through high school and then into college. And then
Went on a scholarship,
yeah, I did.
a chess scholarship.
I won a chess scholarship at a chess tournament and went to UT Dallas because of it. And I actually grew up in Utah and went to college in Dallas. And my mother was really involved in science fiction when I was a kid and was a writer. And I went to my first science fiction convention when I was 7 years old. And so I was kind of just raised with all you wonderful people. And some of my earliest memories are watching Star Trek with her, and she read me, probably the thing that really hooked me to, I think I was kind of raised to just love science fiction and fantasy, but the thing that really hooked me was when I was about 9 or 10 years old, she read me Lord of the Rings. Started with Fellowship of the Ring, me and my sister. And I was reading every night. It was very fun and all that. But then she gets to the Mines of Moria, and it ends like a chapter or something, I don't really remember, with like the pitter-patter of feet of Gollum behind them. And then she quits reading for the night. And so that was the end of her reading to me because I stole it and read with a flashlight. And I was hooked with reading all that great stuff after that.
You could do that to your kids now.
It's the plan. It's my evil plot. Don't tell them.
So, Bill, ongoing plans for the... we're going to have an ebook anthology, by God.
Yeah, the plan is to have a 10-year anniversary anthology, which will have all of the first, second, and third place stories for the first 10 years. So that will be 30 stories. A lot of great writers and a lot of great stories will be included in there. So if you haven't managed to keep up with the stories that we've been publishing for this contest now, then will be your opportunity. So that's coming up. Should be, I think next year will be the 10th year. So.
By the way, I would you can find all the old stories. They're still out there. They're online for one thing, but they're also collected in ebook form in our free fiction, our free short story anthologies. For like we have the 2014 free short story anthology at baenebooks.com. So all of the stories are, I believe, collected, or at least the last few years for sure. So you can find some of these great stories that have won over the years. And when is the contest open back up, and what's the?
It opens up in October, and it's a rather large window. It lasts for about 3-4 months.
Tell us the real criteria, so that if somebody out there hears that they could write that kind of story.
Well, we're looking for near future, which 50, 60 years. It's not a hard, fast line. But we're not looking for magic technologies, really. We're looking for things that are plausible. Like one of the things that would be a really hard sell is warp drives, and we don't want galactic empires. We don't really want alien invasions, that kind of thing. We want to show the near future of humans mostly in our solar system, or at least like in the case of these two of these stories, our first attempt at getting to another star, something, and because we think, at Baen and at NSS, we think that there's a lot of adventure and a lot of amazing things that await us out there. And anybody who sees that as a limiting factor just isn't really trying very hard.
Yeah. So, and if you win, you get to come to the International Space Development Conference and wherever it may be held, and get a pointy trophy, and we'll publish you, and we'll pay you for the honor of publishing your story.
And where is it next year?
Puerto Rico.
Is it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Tony's probably going to get that one.
Yeah, she told me she had dibs on that one. William Ledbetter, Robert Dawson, Jamie Lackey, and Jim Baen Memorial Short Story Award winner for, are we calling it 2015 or 2015. Yeah.
KB Rylander, Karen Rylander. Thank you so much, guys, for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And now, here is the conclusion of Hard Magic by Larry Correia, as read by Bronson Pinchot. We've had some great listening in this book over the past few months, and we want to thank Audible.com for allowing us to serialize it. You can get the complete audiobook at Audible.com, and if you're not a member, you can get the audiobook free, or one of more than 100,000 other titles when you try Audible free for 30 days. It's the 1930s in America, but it's an America that has been magically changed. In the 1860s, a handful of people from all walks of life were visited with special magical talents. In each generation, more are so affected. These people are called actives. Most actives use their powers for good, but some don't. Jake Sullivan is a private eye. He's also a former soldier, an ex-con, and an active heavy, the type of active that controls the force of gravity. Jake is good at it. Jake has been recruited by a mysterious secret organization of actives, the Grim Noir, who are dedicated to seeing humanity through a possible magic-based apocalypse, an apocalypse that seems to be accelerating toward a terrible finale. Here is Bronson Pinchot with our final segment of Hard Magic by Larry Correia.
Epilogue. Now is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end, but it is, perhaps, the end of the beginning. Winston Churchill, longtime critic of the Imperium, upon hearing of Chairman Okubo Tokugawa's demise, 1932. New York City, New York, 3 months later. He had to admit this really was a pretty spectacular office. From the top of the Chrysler Building, he could see the dirigibles docking at the Empire State Building, and every inch of the place was pure, polished opulence. I've got to hand it to the old coot. He certainly knew how to live. Yes, Mr. Stuyvesant, the new UBF Vice President of Finance said as he flopped onto the overstuffed leather couch. You know why your grandfather used to say that he liked this building the best? Francis Cornelius Stuyvesant II turned from the glass wall, picked up the bottle of fine wine from his marble desk, and walked over. No. Why is that, Mr. Chandler? The accountant laughed as he held out the empty glass. He said it was because it was pointy. Francis poured him another refill. Can you believe that? He sat on the couch, uncomfortable in his new tuxedo. He'd inherited the most powerful company in the world. He'd gone toe-to-toe with the most dangerous wizard in history. He'd survived direct hits from 2 Tesla superweapons. He was a telekinetic and also happened to be a member of a magical secret society. I can believe just about anything. Chandler inhaled the drink in one gulp and gave a contented sigh. Well, now that we've gotten the legal aspects taken care of and all the papers are signed, UBF is all yours, Francis. The accountant usually only called him by his first name after he'd had a few too many. "What are you going to do now?" Francis swirled the wine around, but didn't really feel like drinking. "I don't know. I've got so much responsibility. I can run this company the way I always thought it should have been run." The accountant shook his head. "I meant about the other thing." The 5 UBF men who'd survived the Tokugawa had all been paid buckets of money and sworn to secrecy. "Well, in the papers I'm a famous billionaire playboy. I suppose it isn't really practical for the head of UBF to go out and battle evil. Maybe I could wear a disguise when I fulfill my grim noir duties, like a mask or something." "That is perhaps the stupidest thing I've ever heard," Chandler laughed. "You're a hoot." Francis grinned sheepishly. "Yeah, that is pretty ridiculous. So what are your plans now that everything is under control?" "Me? I'm a bookkeeper who drinks too much, is always in a foul mood, and hates coming to work. But since you're paying me lots of money because of my refreshing honesty, I'm not going anywhere." He stood and walked to the door, but paused on his way out. "Though I have given some thought to trying my hand at writing." Francis chuckled. "Good night, Ray." The accountant gave a little salute with 2 fingers and closed the door behind him. It was a rare man you could trust with either a Thompson or a General Ledger. Francis stayed on the couch, enjoying being alone in the quiet lights of the city. "It's been a long day," he muttered to himself. "No kidding," Faye said as she appeared directly in front of him. "Gah!" He spilled the wine all over his pants. "Don't do that." Faye clucked disapprovingly and put her hands on her hips. "It ain't my fault you don't have a head map. Sheesh, look at that. You're going to be all stained." It was then that he realized Faye was wearing an honest-to-goodness evening dress, and her hair was done up, and she was wearing jewelry and lipstick. How scandalous. I... He was speechless. "Well, yeah, I do clean up pretty good, huh?" Faye smiled. "Jane helped me." She twirled for him. "Not bad for a hick, huh?" "Not bad at all," he answered truthfully. She beamed at the compliment. "Like I was saying, though, super long day. Rumor is that there's iron guards up to something in Alabama, and Lance is going to go check it out. But then some active kids got rounded up by a mob for nothing but being active since folks are still all riled up at us. And they're having a sham trial, so Heinrich's going down there to help them. And Jane and Dan's wedding is coming up next week, and they said you have to come, don't care how busy you are. And Mr. Browning says hello from France, and his telegram said that he'd be honored to be in charge of the American Knights, but the stupid elders still won't give up Mr. Rawls, and still nobody knows where Mr. Sullivan went off to, but he said it was really important, so it must be. And that reminds me, Mr. Southunder called and said thanks for the new fancy blimp, and..." Francis put his finger on her lips. Nothing stopped Faye when her head got to spinning. "We're going to be late for the play. I can fix that real quick." He was hesitant. After she'd traveled an entire dirigible, Faye had slept for a week straight. Her power had been severely overtaxed, nearly burned out, and she was still recovering. It turned out that even Faye had limits. "Can't we take the elevator?" Faye's gray eyes twinkled. The traveler may only have worked her way back up to a small part of the magic she'd tapped during the battle, but nothing could keep Faye down for long. She took his hand. "Elevators are for chumps."
This has been an Audible Frontiers production. Executive producer, Steve Feldberg. Producer, Mike Charzik. Music by Michael Whalen. Copyright 2011 by Larry Correa. Production copyright 2011 by Audible Inc.
And that was our final segment of Hard Magic by Larry Correia, as read by Bronson Pinchot. And that's it for the podcast. Thanks to Audible.com and to podcast theme composer Ruth Judkowitz. And a 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 blast off of huzzahs and way to goes and some hey, I want to read that to our Baen Memorial Short Story Award winner, K.B. Rylander, and runners-up Jamie Lackey and Robert Dawson, as well as gratitudinous Maximus Rex to William Ledbetter, the JBM contest administrator. Please join us next time here at the hammering heart of science fiction and fantasy, and keep reaching for the stars.